You've already accepted that you're going to lose your job. Maybe you won't admit it out loud. Maybe you're still trying to convince yourself that your position is special, different, immune to automation. But deep down, in some honest corner of your mind, you know. You saw the signs, you read the news, you used the tools, you realized that the task that used to take hours can now be done in minutes by an algorithm. You understood that the difference between what you produce and what an AI produces is rapidly decreasing and in some cases has already disappeared completely. So let's skip that part of the conversation. Let's accept as a premise that yes, artificial intelligence will take your job, and it will do so without any hesitation, remorse, or consideration for what that means for you. But here's what almost no one is really thinking about: the real terror that should keep you awake at night. Losing your job is just the beginning. It's the first domino to fall. What comes next? The cascade of consequences that unfolds from that initial moment. That's the real apocalypse. And nobody, absolutely nobody, is prepared to navigate what happens next. Let me paint a specific, concrete picture of what happens next in practice. You lose your job. Let's say you were a financial analyst, a graphic designer, a copywriter, a junior lawyer, any middle-class profession with a college education. At first, you feel that initial shock, that mixture of anger and denial. But you're resilient, optimistic. You believe in yourself. You update your resume. You start looking for new positions. And here's where reality really starts to bite. You're not just competing with other unemployed humans. You're competing with the fact that companies have discovered they no longer need to hire someone for your role. The position hasn't been filled by someone else. The position has ceased to exist. You look in adjacent fields, try to reposition yourself, consider a career change, but you discover that the same automation processes are happening everywhere. Opportunities aren't just more competitive, they're evaporating. 3 months pass. Your savings are dwindling. You start making concessions, accepting temporary jobs, odd jobs, anything to keep some income coming in. But these jobs pay a fraction of what you used to earn, offer no benefits, no security, or career progression. You're treading water, not building towards anything. 6 months pass. Money is seriously running out now. You stop going out with friends because you can no longer afford it. You cut subscriptions, services, any non-essential spending. You start falling behind on bills. Your credit score starts to drop. Financial pressure translates into relationship pressure. Arguments with your partner or family about money become frequent and tense. A year passes. You're seriously considering moving to another city, maybe moving with your family, giving up on dreams you had. The narrative you had about your life, about who you are and where you're going, is crumbling. But here's where it gets really grim. You're not alone on this trajectory. Millions of people are going through the same process simultaneously. And when millions of people lose purchasing power at the same time, the effects begin to ripple through the economy in ways that create destructive feedback loops. That restaurant you used to frequent closes because it doesn't have enough customers. This means the restaurant employees lose their jobs. They stop buying from other businesses. More businesses close, more people become unemployed. The housing market begins to collapse because people can't afford rent or mortgages. Banks begin to suffer from massive defaults. Credit shrinks. Companies that depend on credit to operate begin to fail. It's a self-perpetuating downward spiral, and the longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to reverse. The healthcare system begins to collapse under pressure. People who lost their jobs also lost their health insurance. Treatable conditions become crises because people can't afford preventative treatment. Hospitals are overwhelmed with emergency cases from people who waited until they had no other choice. Mental health epidemics explode as depression, anxiety, and despair become the norm, not the exception. The already inadequate mental health system is completely overwhelmed. Suicide rates skyrocket. Substance abuse explodes as people seek any escape from an unbearable reality. And all of this creates an additional burden on social systems that were already under extreme pressure. Crime is increasing dramatically and predictably. When people lack legitimate means of survival, when they feel the system has abandoned them, when they see no future or hope, some turn to illegitimate means. Theft, trafficking, fraud, violence, everything increases. But it's not just crime out of necessity, it's also anger and resentment manifesting in destructive acts. People attacking symbols of wealth and power, vandalism, protests that turn violent, even domestic terrorism by individuals or groups who have decided that if the system doesn't work for them, they will destroy the system. And this creates a demand for more policing, more surveillance, more authoritarian control, which in turn increases tensions and fuels cycles of violence. Family structures begin to disintegrate under pressure. Financial stress is a major cause of divorce, and now you have financial stress on an epidemic scale. Families break up. Children grow up in broken homes, in poverty, without stability or hope for a better future. This creates profound generational damage. Children who grow up traumatized, who lack opportunities, who learn early on that the world is a cruel and unfair place where effort doesn't matter. These children grow up with problems that perpetuate cycles of poverty and dysfunction. The human capital of entire societies is destroyed for generations. The social fabric deteriorates in subtle but profound ways. Communities that were once cohesive begin to fragment. People turn inward, focusing only on their own survival and that of their immediate family. Social trust, that sense that we are all in this together, that we can count on each other, evaporates. In its place arises an us versus them mentality, where any limited resource becomes a source of conflict. Ethnic, racial, and religious groups are pitted against each other, each blaming the other for their problems, when the real cause is an economic system that has failed to adapt to technological change. Political systems are entering an existential crisis. Liberal democracies were built on the assumption of a stable and prosperous middle class. When this middle class is economically destroyed, when people lose faith that the system works for them, they become susceptible to authoritarian and extremist narratives. Demagogues emerge promising simple solutions to complex problems, usually involving convenient scapegoats. Immigrants, minorities, intellectual elites, foreign corporations, anyone can be blamed. Political discourse becomes increasingly radical and violent. Compromise and moderation are seen as weakness. Democratic institutions are attacked and undermined. In extreme cases, entire democracies can collapse into authoritarianism or even civil war. International tensions are escalating dangerously. Countries facing deep domestic crises have an incentive to create external enemies as a way to unify their populations and deflect blame. Old conflicts and resentments resurface. Arms races accelerate. The risk of war, including war involving nuclear weapons, increases dramatically. And in a world where AI is also revolutionizing military capabilities, where autonomous weapons and cyber warfare create new forms of conflict, the stakes are exponentially higher than in any previous war. The environment suffers in unexpected ways. When societies are in crisis, long-term concerns like climate change and conservation become luxuries that no one can afford to prioritize. Environmental regulations are relaxed or abandoned in the name of job creation and economic growth. Natural resources are exploited unsustainably, and ironically, social and economic chaos can even make it more difficult to implement the very technological solutions that could help solve environmental problems, because they require international cooperation and long-term investment that become impossible in a fragmented world focused on short-term survival. The education system is collapsing. Schools depend on tax funding, and when the economy is in crisis, tax revenues plummet. Schools close, teachers are laid off, programs are cut, But more fundamentally, when young people look around and see educated adults unemployed and desperate, they lose faith in the narrative that education leads to a better future. Why spend years studying when there are no jobs waiting at the end? This creates a lost generation that abandons education precisely when they most need the skills to navigate a complex and changing world. Infrastructure deteriorates. Maintaining roads, bridges, water systems, power grids, all of this requires constant investment. When governments are in fiscal crisis, when they have to choose between keeping the lights on and repairing a bridge, maintenance suffers. Then, society's physical infrastructure literally begins to crumble. This creates additional economic costs, safety risks, and further deterioration in quality of life. Financial systems face systemic risks. Banks discover that vast portions of their loan portfolios are in default. Stock markets panic as company valuations become uncertain in a radically transformed economy. Currencies of the most affected countries may experience inflationary collapse. Cryptocurrencies and other alternative assets may see extreme volatility. The global financial system, already complex and interconnected in ways difficult to fully comprehend, may experience shocks that propagate in unpredictable and potentially catastrophic ways. The media and entertainment industry is transforming in ways that eliminate one of the last escape valves. If AI can create films, series, music, games, why pay human artists? But when all entertainment is generated by algorithms, when there is no longer that human connection, that feeling of art coming from real and shared human experience, something vital is lost. Entertainment becomes just another thing, optimized by algorithms to maximize engagement, not to enrich or inspire. And in a world where people are already lost and searching for meaning, losing even that connection is yet another blow. Science and research suffer paradoxically. You would think AI would help, and in some areas it does, but cutting-edge research requires substantial funding, complex infrastructure, and international collaboration. When economies are in crisis, when countries are turned inward and focused on survival, investment in basic research dries up. Scientists lose jobs, laboratories close. Advances that could eventually help solve some of the problems we face simply don't happen because there aren't the resources or stability needed to do cutting-edge science. And through all of this, there's a growing sense of absurdity and injustice that corrodes any remaining social cohesion. Because while millions suffer, a small elite that controls AI technology lives in unprecedented abundance. Their robots produce everything they need. Their AIs manage their investments. They live in isolated enclaves, protected from the chaos outside, essentially in a different world from the rest of humanity. And this divergence between human experiences, this sense that we are living in completely different realities within the same society, destroys any sense of shared destiny or mutual responsibility. Some people will argue that I'm being overly pessimistic, that humans are resilient, that we always find solutions. And yes, humans are incredibly resilient and creative. But resilience has limits. Systems can only absorb so much stress before they break. And history is full of examples of societies that faced changes they couldn't navigate, that collapsed or were transformed in profoundly traumatic ways. The Black Death, the fall of the Roman Empire, the World Wars. It's not impossible for entire civilizations to enter prolonged periods of suffering and chaos. What makes this situation particularly dangerous is the speed. Massive historical changes usually happened over generations, allowing time for adaptation. This change is happening over years or decades, and it's global, not localized. There's nowhere to run, no unaffected society that can serve as a model or safe haven. We're all in the same boat, and the boat is sailing into uncharted territory at ever-increasing speed. The tragedy is that it didn't have to be this way. If we had started planning seriously 20 years ago, we could be implementing a managed transition. We could be retraining workers, implementing robust safety nets, redesigning economic systems to distribute the benefits of automation more broadly. But we didn't. And now, as the crisis unfolds, options become increasingly limited. Actions that would have been relatively easy if taken preventively now require massive effort and sacrifice. And the longer we wait, the worse it gets. Some tech companies promise they are thinking about these issues, that they have teams working on ethics and social impact. But these teams have minuscule resources and power compared to teams developing capabilities. And fundamentally, private companies have no incentive or mandate to optimize social well-being. They optimize profit for shareholders. Expecting them to solve the massive social problems they are creating is naive. Governments would have to intervene, but as we have already discussed, governments are behind the curve and lack the will or capacity to act on the necessary scale. So what happens next? The real and honest answer is suffering on a massive scale. It's the deterioration of virtually every aspect of civilized life that we take for granted. It's the collapse of social order, an explosion of violence and hopelessness, the disintegration of the structures that keep society functioning. It's people losing not only jobs, but identity, purpose, dignity, hope. It's families destroyed, communities fragmented, nations turned against each other. It's the worst of human nature emerging when resources are scarce and the future seems hopeless. It's a prolonged period of chaos and suffering from which we will eventually emerge, because human history is long and resilient, but not before paying a terrible price measured in lives destroyed, unrealized potential, and profound generational trauma. And the most disturbing part of all this is that it has already begun. The first dominoes have already fallen. Entire industries have already been transformed. Millions have already lost their jobs to automation. Signs of social tension are already visible everywhere if you know where to look. We are not talking about some hypothetical distant future. We are talking about the present and the very near future. The window to prevent the worst outcomes has largely closed. We are now in the realm of damage control, of trying to soften the impact, of preparing as best as possible for the turbulence that is coming. And even modest efforts at preparation and mitigation, we are not doing adequately. So when you think about AI taking your job, don't stop at the moment of job loss. Think about the following month when savings are dwindling. Think about the following year when hopes are dying. Think about the following decade when entire societies are transforming in fundamental and often destructive ways. Think about the children growing up in this world, about the kind of society they will inherit, about the challenges they will face. Because that whole cascade of consequences, all that suffering and chaos and transformation, that's what happens next. And that, not the job losses themselves, is the real nightmare we should be confronting.